Hey everyone, um, Islam here. I'm gonna go through in this talk. I'm gonna go through uh, digitalization or digital transformation and breaches. Very briefly, we'll spend some time talking about encryption and its importance to GDPR. In general, we will talk about encryption, tokenization, and key management. We will touch on a unified data protection as a strategy, basically how to do it right. So just starting warming up, business or businesses are adopting next generation platforms and technologies, and it's all uh, to achieve digital transformation. Obviously, you're all familiar with this cloud and containers. Our organization would like to take advantage of the economics of the cloud, their flexibility, deployment of containers or applications within containers, and we all want to take advantage of Internet of Things, the interconnected devices, and whatever value and benefit they're bringing to us, to digital payments, adopting new forms of payments. These days, you land in a country and you don't even see their currency. It's all digital. It's all mobile or cards. Uh, So the world is changing, and of course, big data is an important tool for analytics to make sense of all this digital transformation data that's born from it. Our taxis are no longer conventional. We use Ubers and Lyft and different means. Our blockbuster is Netflix. So the point is we're moving to digitalization big time, and of course there is a lot of the data that's born from digital transformation, and that leads to the bad guys wanting to have piece of it, pursuing the data and mostly the sensitive piece of it to abuse it and use it. In our Thales's 2018 Global Data Threat Report, we have seen 67% of enterprises have now been breached. This is over time. Obviously, if we just look at the last couple of years, you can see here 2016, 2017, 2018, from 21% to 26 to 36. Uh, this is just the people that we have interviewed, of course. This is people we have asked. The real data that's been breached, the real amount of data on the real number of breaches is always unknown. There are those who have been breached and those who don't know it, and that's true for most of us. How today a business or a database can fit in a single USB, right? So the data is can be copied without everyone knowing. And who to protect against? Is it internal people or external people? So data is really exposed to either internal or external people, and it's hard to get the right number of the breaches. But at least this is from a respondent, pretty high in general. So pretty sad news here, as 50% of UK consumers don't even trust organizations they care about their data, and that's not good for the business. I've talked once to a doctor who moved their bank account from a financial institution to another one. I didn't think people actually pay attention to all these details, but it turns out that some people do, and they do actually care about who's secure and who's not. And obviously, since the subject is about GDPR, here are some high-level action items. You guys all know this. I just, scan them quickly, but we need to perform compliance check and gap analysis. Where is the personal data processing fit within GDPR? How is that happening? We have to know. We have to establish projects, resources, have the right resources, skills, and budgets, and have the executive team support to build on GDPR need, including that data mapping. We have to know a lot about data, its life cycle, its flow, where is it stored, and even when we know the flow and storage, it is extremely important to know who's accessing it. In general, the data should only be accessed by the applications that are needing that data, that have to access that data, not everybody, not every admin, not every and user or root or all of those. So data protection strategy is an extremely important point, and we're going to discuss it more because we can't just protect data in panic. It typically creates silos. DPI for high risk processing, that's important. It's very well described in GDPR. We have to approach data protection by design and by default these days. Everything we initiate should include data security and data protection. When we say data protection here, we're really referring to data security, because in storage, data protection is sort of a backup, but it's really all about security here. This point is extremely important. I was hoping that we can actually pressure the software vendors to actually design their solutions with security by design, by default, to simplify the task for the customers and organizations. Push for awareness training and return the log for that. GDPR, again, is an ongoing process. When we say GDPR is an ongoing process, the whole data protection is really an ongoing process. We have been working with customers for 10, 12, 14 years. We continue to work with them. There are new use cases, new platforms, new products, new solutions, new data, and it's a lot of it gets generated and more sensitive data, and different use cases are approached differently. So GDPR has to be pursued forever, but again, setting up the basis is extremely important. So this just shows what the importance of encryption for GDPR. They say if the personal data is breached, obviously it has higher risk, you have to notify the users. However, if you render the personal data useless, then you don't have to. And the example of technology or technique that's given is encryption. So why encryption? Encryption and tokenization or pseudonymization are typically the technologies that are mentioned here mostly because they're the only ones that, or the ones that are really close to data itself. They wrap the data itself. You can build as much perimeters or as much techniques as we like, but the encryption can even live with the data and move the data. So the other point here is they're telling us to render the data useless to those who are not authorized to access it. It sounds like we're going to be breached anyway. So we want people, we want organizations to assume that they will be breached, and they have to protect that data, and even if it's stolen, it's still protected, with obviously keys being decoupled from encryption. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So this is we used to have a couple of slides here where we list how many times are pseudonymization and encryption called out in GDPR. The answer, of course, here is 19, but the other slide would list a lot of different techniques to protect data and the parameters, and a long list, but the total of mentions is 0. Again, everything is important. All tools, security tools are important, but the pseudonymization, such as a technique to use, would be tokenization and encryption. They wrap the data, they're closed data. What is I typically like to to define encryption for those who are not cryptographers as a basic using an algorithm to scramble a data and the key using a key. And that key is the secret. That key has to be decoupled from the encryption. We have seen a lot of people encrypting. Encryption is extremely simple if we don't do it right. But to do it right in the enterprise is pretty hard. That key typically sits with the data, and that's not the right thing to do. So the key has to be in an enterprise key manager. Pseudonymization may be achieved by tokenization. And tokenization is pretty simple. It's basically you take a name, you replace it by something that looks and feels like a name. Same for the password or credit card or email or social security number. Aslam would be a slash, John would be James, etc. So that data can be given to anybody, and they want to make sense out of it. It's very important because that's how you may provide even the database, for example, to QA, to researchers. That's how you can even provide your databases or archives or all data to analytics, to big data. They can run their numbers, they can run their functions and analytics, yet the data is obfuscated. That's what GDPR is about. It's how can we make sure that the person is not identified. It's pretty much by playing everything, by doing everything to cover the information of the person, encryption and tokenization. So, however, we have seen really a big disconnect in the market. We have seen 94% of organizations using digital transformation technologies, but sensitive data is still there, is exposed. I mean, it sounds like people rush to results before worrying about the sensitive data. Yet two-thirds of them actually don't deploy any security at all. And even sometimes when you deploy security, there are different techniques to approach it in correct way. This is from this year's report. Last year, we have seen that security spending was increasing, but the breaches were also increasing. The conclusion is everybody will be breached. At least make sure that the data again is useless. If it was tokenized, then when you get breached, the tokenized data will be taken. You will still have your original data and keys, etc. So that's a disconnect, and we're hoping that organizations can improve on protecting data as they move it to analytics and cloud and although there's a lot of pressure from the cloud, obviously, because customers now feel or organizations feel that I'm taking data out of my data center, giving it to an external entity. Now I need to secure it. It wasn't secure in the first place anyway, not enough. And in the cloud, there's a lot of work to be done, although there are pretty good initiatives out there. So of course, the data can be structured. It has to be. I mean, talking about encryption, sometimes you just have to go after all your servers and make sure to encrypt. It's pretty hard to find all the data. And it's even if we know what servers contain sensitive data today, that may not be the case tomorrow. So at least starting somewhere is always good. Structured data, meaning all the databases and the tables and then whatever is saved in a structured fashion. And structured data could be HR files or application files or commercial or business application files, etc. Files and folders and shares, all that need to be encrypted. Otherwise, the data, even when whether it's in a backup or in those servers, it can just be copied. It's pretty. We're very exposed in general. In emotion as well, I mean, at least the basic, typically, we have seen customers use TLS, is pretty common from application to application or from application to database to just encrypt the pipe. We have also seen there are techniques to encrypt between networks as well. I mean, we have seen organizations being hacked, someone just listening to a fiber link either between floors or between data centers, etc. So, of course, authentication and PKI are big deal in the same to close the concept here, authenticating devices and deploying and really making these techniques across all platforms. Again, encryption is one piece, key management is the other piece, certified key management, key storage that's distributed, that can work in multiple data centers, can work in the cloud, can be integrated with cloud vendor solutions. Uh, you'll be able to generate solid keys, back them up, replicate them, etc. Secure backup and restore, for example, and all kind of keys, symmetric, asymmetric, and strong ones, with support for a new protocol. So what we have seen is in the cloud and most applications, the REST APIs or SDKs are pretty good. They solve most of the problems. But what we have seen in a storage environment is typically KMIP, key management interoperability, which is a standard protocol. Key management really is a big deal, and especially on also access control. Keys should only be accessed by those application, not even users, or that needs the keys to encrypt and decrypt. In fact, some applications sometimes are exposed and can only encrypt. If they don't have to decrypt the data, if they're just absorbing data, why even have a policy of decryption? So just this is where we take a little bit of time to explain the best approaches of protecting data. Encryption is really not equal. I mean, sometimes we hear that encryption is easy, but encryption, of course, there are blankets, there are simple encryption, but to get it right is always interesting. So the way we have always explained that the best options on encryption is when we start from a data flow. Data is typically generated somewhere. Uh, in another application, in a mobile, I can update my LinkedIn or Facebook profile or anything, or just my bank form. I can update my bank form and save it. And that data is pushed to an application. That could be a pool of application servers. Of course, there are networks and firewalls, but they're just transparent to the game. The application would process the data. If it's structured, it would be stored in a structured fashion in database. You could see I'm going through that flow there. The database itself it's just a file. It's in a file folder, and there's always a storage underneath. The way we have always approached encryption is you have to capture this data in one of those layers and encrypt it. And the earlier, the better the security is. Of course, we can just get a storage, a blanket full disk encryption, a lower layer, for example, and encrypt the data there. And when you log into a server, you don't even know that the data is encrypted. But when a hacker logs into the server, they don't know it's encrypted either. So even a malware, they could do whatever they want. So the basic that we typically add to that level is at least key management to decouple the key from the storage. And of course, if you want to eliminate admins and malwares from accessing that data, you can take it to the next layer where you do it at file level. Now you can encrypt files and folders, and you make sure that after checking access control, who can access the files and who cannot, then they could access the data. It's based on access control, where you can even eliminate the root from impersonating users, etc. You can eliminate malware if they don't have the permissions, like permissions to destroy the data. However, even at that level, when you encrypt the database, for example, as one big file or folder, you still can't eliminate, for example, someone who accesses data as database administrator. So the big question really is, who are we protecting against? Internal, external people, internal or external hackers, internal people, administrators, etc. So for the database itself, the best security is always at the application layer, where data flows, you tokenize your user records, GDPR data, PII data, and then once it gets to database or file or storage, it's all already protected. You can use tokenization, you can use format preserving encryption. This is where in GDPR, security by design or by default, as we move to the future, is extremely important. This is the best practice, right? In some cases, I mean, these are all complementary. In some cases, we might even combine two techniques to achieve best data protection. But that's pretty much. But every time we do encryption, let's not forget that keys exist. They have to be decoupled, and data has to be protected. Moving forward, it's pretty much that technique that you would take and apply it in a data center. Basically, application level integration, operating system level integration, database level, storage level, with an enterprise key management, and the same technique can be moved to the cloud, can be applied in the cloud infrastructure as a service. Because infrastructure as a service really is just like a data center. You have your servers, you pretty much have all the flexibility to play the same game you're playing in a data center. But what gets a little bit tricky is when we move to platform as a service and SaaS. Platform as a service, for example, when you provision a database, you don't know where that database is provisioned, which means you can't even install a security within that database. Of course, the cloud vendors provide the blanket encryption there, but there are techniques. At the application layer, you still have a power. You can still do the pseudonymization of users. You can still tokenize users and encrypt user data, GDPR data. You can still catch it because you have a lot of power to build your applications, etc. But these days, data can also be saved in a backup, as a backup in storage. You can use gateways that encrypt data, GDPR data, while it moves into the gateway. Through the gateway, it gets encrypted and stored like in S3 or Azure's storage or any other third party. You could use that. And obviously the containers, it's the same techniques you have been using in VMs. Most of them can apply to the containers as well. So again, this is really the previous slide. We explained how to approach it. This is more of how to deploy it in different environment, and the same concept apply. But that's a highlight. The final slide almost is here. Is you can approach a data protection in a siloed fashion, or you can unify data protection and build a better strategy, achieve a consistent, strong security, where you eliminate silos, eliminate duplicating the resources and implementations. We have advised organizations to centralize security teams, to centralize the decisions, and to approach it in a centralized fashion, where you can build now a consistent security versus different teams will approach security at different levels. When you centralize it in a strong, skilled team, they can build a very consistent security, and then they can enforce it. They can enforce that level on all the other organizations. And other organizations or teams or groups or developers or business units don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch. Every time they're about to solve the problem, they approach the centralized team. The centralized team might just give them instructions. If we have already protected analytics, big data, why basically reinvent the wheel? Why can't we just repeat it for every team that needs it? That's a high level. There's a lot to this story, but again, unified, holistic data protection in centralized fashion to make it consistent, strong, and low cost. So that's what we do with Thales and Softcat to help customers to achieve compliance, advanced encryption and key management with strong global support. I have some resources here. They can be at thalessecurity.co.uk. You can all access them, and that's pretty much the end of at least this presentation here.
Thank you, Slam. Thank you, everyone. Just as a reminder that we're going to take some questions, so feel free to send these using the chat function or the Q&A tool. So first question is, Slam, would your advice be to start an encryption deployment project piecemeal in the organization or throughout the enterprise in one go?
Yeah, so through the enterprise in one go is pretty typically hard. The best thing to do is to start with the critical applications. In fact, the best thing to do is to build that centralized team first that scales and work with the right organizations to help you out, and then start with the same, with the most critical applications. And after a while, you will start to figure out or to see that there is a pattern in the way the data is protected, and just expand as you move forward.
Yep, great, thank you. And another question is, given the complexity of many organizations, what's your view on classifying data prior to encryption in order to start to address GDPR compliance?
Yeah, so I talked to a customer today in the Philippines, and they wanted to classify data and count the server, but the outcome is an infinite work with no result. That's where we come in, and actually we tell customers, if you know what servers are in production, you can just encrypt them all. You know the critical application, maybe you could level the security there. Because even if we decide today that, okay, well, that set of servers does not have sensitive data, we can not assure that tomorrow. Even when my laptop is provisioned the first time, I know what it has the first day, but not the second day. So pretty much we expect customers to go after holistic data protection, but point out those that need more security and work harder to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question that's come through is about sharing keys across multiple personnel as a way of kind of adding another layer of protection. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's very, very important. But that should be most of the key management happens against the applications. But yes, there is a case where administrators, for example, will need to access the key. Let's say if someone won't delete the key, he can just delete it, security administrator. That's not the right thing to do. It has to be shared, or the access to key deletion has to be shared amongst administrators. What we call dual control, or M of N. You would have 2 out of 3 have to submit their password or piece of the key before they to be authenticated, and then they can perform that sensitive operations. Absolutely, in some cases that's necessary.
Great, thank you, Sam. I'm not seeing many more questions come through, so we'll take one last question, unless you have anyone has a burning question they would like to ask. How much should GDPR inform or shape organizations' data security approach? What would be like an appropriate way of adapting any existing processes to meet GDPR?
Well, just like, so there's one thing that I have always advised customers, because I have seen a lot of documents or articles that say, hey, you need to protect data by the 25th of May. That's the impossible. That's absolutely the impossible. 2 years ago, we have been telling customers, you should have started 3 years ago. So there's a lot of applications, a lot of data. Of course, if customers start in good intentions, they will still do good. But it's like I mentioned in the middle of the presentation, there are customers we have worked with for 10 years, 12, 14 years, and yet there are still use cases and sensitive data. So yeah, customers need to start, but think of it in a holistic way so they don't have to duplicate the effort, and eventually they'll achieve a great outcome.
Great, thank you, Sam. And we've got another question. What are the issues in developing data encryption strategy?
The biggest issue is maybe funny is really to get over the politics of different business units and have perhaps also the great thing is if you have the executive team support, you can achieve it. When you go to your management and present a data protection strategy, I bet you'll become a hero of the organization if you do it right. Because the security is hard to get right, and it's hard to centralize. But if you pitch it in the right way to the executive management and get their support, you'll get a lot of visibility, a lot of support.
Great, thank you, Sam. I've just got another few questions coming through. Another question is, can organizations be proactive in responding to cyber threats?
Oh, that sounds like war.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. That should go through legal. It sounds like a legal question. If we should be, you know, the best defense is offense, right? Is that the right thing to do here in cybersecurity? I don't know. Maybe a legal team will have a better opinion there.
Okay, great. Thank you. If there are no more questions, I think that is all the time we have for this afternoon. Thank you, Sam, for talking with us today, and thank you for everyone for joining us.